Sanctuary cities have been in the news lately as President Trump signed an executive order to withhold some federal funding from communities seeking to protect illegal immigrants from deportation. Northampton has been a sanctuary city since 2014. Carolee McGrath spoke with Mayor David Narkewicz for his reaction to the president's action.
Well, in 2014, myself and the then police chief started hearing from people in our community, particularly people in immigrant communities, that they were concerned about the current posture of federal immigration officials with regard to some of the programs, one in particular, Secure Communities. And so the concern really, both from the community's perspective, but also from law enforcement's perspective, was that it was the policies, which ostensibly were designed to deport terrorists, were in many cases going after people that were law-abiding, hardworking people who were just sort of stuck in our broken immigration system. And that was kind of eroding trust between law enforcement and immigrant communities. So like many communities around the nation, I think we're up to over 300 now, I issued an executive order basically laying out what our policy would be as a city, as a police department, with regard to enforcement of immigration laws. And specifically said that, our police department would not be in the business of enforcing federal immigration laws. If we received an administrative detainer request, which is a voluntary request from ICE to detain someone for up to 48 hours, we would not honor that request. And again, I would say it's a voluntary request, that we would not honor that. Further, I said that when we stop somebody for a traffic stop, we would treat it like any other traffic stop. We would not ask people to show their immigration papers. We would not turn it into something more than just local law enforcement.
What about a criminal case, though? If somebody was stopped, is that a natural question that comes up? If somebody was arrested for allegedly raping somebody, child abuse?
So if somebody commits a crime in Northampton, and I was very clear at the time, they will be arrested. They will be arrested, and if they do have an immigration problem, then that will surely come up through that process.
How does it come up through the process?
Well, because generally, if you're dealing with the types of detainer requests I was talking about earlier, that's really a civil matter. But once you get into a felony area, or you're committing a serious crime as opposed to a traffic stop or a broken taillight, then you're going to be charged, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And once you get into the court system, then it's quite likely that your immigration status would come into play once you move into that system. What we're talking about is that if somebody runs a stop sign or something that might happen any day, that if you look like maybe you're not from the United States, are we then going to start asking you for your immigration papers? Local police actually do not have the authority to enforce federal immigration laws. And for us, the big concern, and I think you'll hear this, particularly if you talk to mayors in big cities, mayors with majority populations, is the concern that they need to work with their minority and immigrant populations, that they want people to report crimes, they want people that are victims of domestic violence to report crimes. And if there's a concern that you can't trust the police, that if you go forward to the police to report a crime, and then they're going to start asking questions about, the people that live with you or those kinds of things, that it really erodes trust. And frankly, it's a federal responsibility.
But aren't you concerned about the president's executive order and him saying that he's going to withhold federal funds? I mean, it's one thing to make a political point, but do you think you're putting...
I actually have no concern about that. I think the president, if he would talk to his lawyers, which he clearly hasn't, he has no legal basis to do that. I actually have very full confidence. The one area, first of all, we have this thing called the 10th Amendment, which basically delineates the powers of the federal government versus the powers of the state. And it's quite clear. Actually, the leading case on this issue was written by none other than Justice Antonin Scalia, who President Trump says is his favorite Supreme Court justice of all time. It was a case called Prince versus United States, and basically Justice Scalia said, and you could basically apply it to this situation, the federal government cannot commandeer local police departments to carry out their work. It's quite clear. So on those grounds, I don't think there's a way that they could do it. There's also lots of precedent around federal funding and putting requirements on federal funding. You can say, okay, if you're going to get Title I education funding, you have to do X, Y, and Z, you have to provide reading, you have to do, but you can't say to get federal education funds, you have to enforce federal immigration law. So I think so far the executive order has basically been posturing. It's been, I want ICE to get a list of all the sanctuary cities. I want you to explore, are there ways that we could take federal funding away? But it doesn't actually take any federal funding away.
But I think one of the things that the people who don't feel the way you do and who are very concerned about sanctuary cities is that they're concerned about security. In the executive order, President Trump talks about this is about national security, it's about public safety. What's your response to that? And there have been cases which we had talked about, the San Francisco case, where people will point to, whether it's justified to point to that or not, and say, hey, listen, this is a problem.
My response to that is Northampton is very focused on providing safety in our community. We have zero tolerance for crime. We have one of the best police departments in the state. We're one of the few accredited police departments. If you commit a crime in Northampton, you are going to get arrested. And so the idea that in order to keep the community safe, we have to walk around and ask people for their immigration papers. I mean, you can look at the statistics that show that people that are immigrants commit crimes at a much lower rate than people who are not. I mean, there's lots of evidence that, the intelligence agencies have even pointed out that, the 7 countries that the president wants to ban people coming from, that there's not a lot of evidence that anyone from those countries have committed terrorist acts in the United States. So I think the security piece is being used, again, mostly to scare people, mostly to, unfortunately, play upon people's fears, play upon their racism, play upon Islamophobia.
Right, but not people who are afraid and
Exactly.
disagree on immigration are not necessarily racist. They might just have that different view.
I agree with that, but what I'm saying is that there's a concern that if you ban someone from one country, that's somehow going to keep us all safe. When in fact, we know that the people that perpetrated 9/11 were from a country that's not even on the banned list. We know that the second largest terrorist attack that occurred in the United States was committed by an American citizen, Timothy McVeigh, in Oklahoma City. So I understand all those facts, but I guess you can have a policy like Northampton has and still have a commitment to keeping the community safe and having zero tolerance for violence. If someone commits a crime, we're going to arrest them. If somebody is committing any of the other acts you outlined, we're going to arrest them. If they happen to be somebody that has immigration problems, they'll have to deal with that. But what we will not do is go out into the community and do the federal government's job. And as I said to you earlier, we all know the problem here. The problem is a broken immigration system that Republicans and Democrats agree needs to be fixed.
And we're going to invite you back in on another show to talk about that. Thank you so
I would be happy
much,
to do that.
Mayor Narkewicz, for coming in and joining us.
Thank you very much.